The Mafia boss saw her cornered in the office. She belongs to me. You won't live another day. Port Jericho, New Jersey, a city of split personalities. Old red brick warehouses, slick with Atlantic rain, stood shoulder to shoulder with the glittering glass towers of algorithmic hedge funds. It was a city of dock workers and day traders. And it was just past midnight. On the 32nd floor of the Harbor North Logistics headquarters, the air was stale and cold. Mara Ellington stared at the monitor, the blue light hollowing out her cheeks. She was 29, a forensic auditor with an independent license, a sharp mind, and a pile of student debt that felt like a physical weight on her chest. She was a single mother, she was tired, and she had just found the impossible. Mara followed the numbers. People lied. The numbers never did. And these numbers told a story of theft on a massive scale. It was right there, buried beneath layers of shell companies and obfuscated routing codes, a parallel ledger, a port security fund that was nothing but a pipeline for dark money, siphoned from Harbor North's own supply chain and funneled into a series of untraceable cold crypto wallets. This wasn't just corporate skimming, this was an invasion. A heavy click echoed in the silence. Mara's head snapped up, the maglock on the glass office door. Gavin Rourke, the CFO, stood in the doorway, blocking the dim hallway light. He was a man built of soft handshakes and expensive suits, but the smile he usually wore was gone. Flanking him were two men who did not belong on a finance floor. They were large, wearing the discreet black and gray uniforms of Aegis Meridian, a private security firm known for its brutal efficiency. "Working late, Miss Ellington." Gavin's voice was too calm. Mara's hand slid across the desk, her fingers finding the cold comfort of her metal pen. The numbers didn't reconcile. "Gavin." "Funny thing about numbers," Gavin said, stepping into the room. The Aegis guards fanned out, one moving to block the windows, the other sealing the door. They can be adjusted. He slid a single piece of paper onto her desk, a reconciliation adjustment form. It was a clean wipe, a neatly typed lie that would erase her audit trail, burying the parallel ledger forever. "Sign it," Gavin said. "It wasn't a request." "I can't do that." "You're a single mother. Mara, I've seen your financials. That tuition debt is staggering." He leaned in, his cologne thick and sour. "Sign the paper. Take the generous consulting fee that will appear in your account tomorrow, and forget what you saw." The air crackled. The only sounds were the sharp whine of the industrial document shredder in the corner, its metal teeth waiting, and the incessant tap-tap-tap of the rain against the glass. The red exit sign above the door pulsed, a slow, rhythmic beacon of warning. Flash, flash, flash. Mara measured the distance. 10 feet to the fire alarm, 15 to the door. The guards were faster. She gripped the pen, her thumb finding the plunger. She clicked it, a hard, definitive snap. Gavin sneered, mistaking her tension for surrender. "Don't be stupid. No one is coming to save you." The words were still hanging in the air when the reinforced glass of the office door exploded inward. It wasn't kicked, it was ruptured, blasted from its hinges as if by a silent concussion. The glass pulverized into a million tiny cubes, spraying the expensive carpet. 3 men entered first. They moved low and fast, shadows in flawlessly tailored dark suits. They were not security guards, they were predators. And then he walked in. He was the center of the sudden, violent gravity, Cassian Vale. The name was a whisper in Port Jericho, a ghost story the politicians and the dock unions told, the silent owner of the Valamont outfit. He was the man who owned the brick and the water, the parts of the city that the hedge funds couldn't touch. He wore a black wool overcoat that shed raindrops onto the floor. His presence seemed to suck the air from the room. His eyes, a cold and distant gray, swept the scene, the Aegis guards tensing. Gavin frozen in shock, the shredder, the paper on the desk, and finally, Mara. Gavin Rourke made a choking sound. "Vale, this isn't your business. This is Harbor North territory." Cassian Vale's gaze settled on Gavin. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. He spoke, and his voice was quiet, almost conversational, yet it cut through the sound of the rain and the distant, new ringing of the building's alarms. "She belongs to me. You won't live another day." It was not a fight. It was an erasure. Before the Aegis guards could even unholster their weapons, Cassian's men were on them. There was no gunfire, just the sickening sound of precise, kinetic impacts, a sharp crack, a grunt, and two bodies hitting the floor, neutralized in less than 3 seconds. Gavin scrambled backward, his corporate arrogance vanishing. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking. "You don't know who you're messing with, my backers. They'll bury you." "Your backers," Cassian said, stepping over the threshold, "are irrelevant." He ignored the man on the floor, his full attention locking onto Mara. Mara hadn't moved. Her heart was a piston against her ribs, but her hand was steady on the pen. "Mara Ellington," Bazhi said. "Not Miss. Ellington, Mara. You consulted on 3 anti-fraud patents for Scyscope Analytics, 1 for predictive modeling in supply chains, 2 for identifying vulnerabilities in private blockchains. You filed them under a variant of your mother's maiden name. It was smart." Mara's breath hitched. That work was sealed. It was buried under non-disclosure agreements thicker than a dictionary. "This port," Cassian continued, his voice low, a gravelly rumble meant only for her, "is my territory. You just found the pipeline that North Shore is using to bleed it. You found the people trying to burn down my house." He finally glanced at the whimpering CFO. "And you put your hands on my auditor." He hadn't declared protection. He had declared possession. Cassian looked back at Mara. Her knuckles were white on the pen. She was terrified, but she was not broken. Their eyes met across the ruined office. In his, Mara saw something beyond the raw, apex predator power. She saw an exhaustion so deep it looked like a structural flaw, a weariness that came from holding an empire together with nothing but will. In hers, Cassian saw something he hadn't expected. Not a weakness, not supplication. He saw grit. He saw the unflinching resolve of a woman who had faced down failure and debt and loneliness, and was still standing, still holding the one weapon she had. He saw the woman who wasn't shaking. The Valamon outfit's cleanup was a masterpiece of silent efficiency. Gavin Rourke and the 2 Aegis Meridian guards were bound, gagged, and vanished from the 32nd floor before the building's primary alarms had even identified the breach. One of Cassian's men, a quiet man with the hands of a surgeon, efficiently powered down Mara's laptop, bagged her phone, and slid them into a signal-blocking briefcase. Mara watched her evidence disappear. The pen was still tight in her grip. "I'm not for sale," she said. Her voice was steady, though her pulse hammered against her throat. Cassian Vale stood by the shattered doorway, the wind from the broken glass whipping at his black coat. "I know," he said, not looking at her. "If you were, you would have signed Gavin's paper. You're worthless to me as an employee, but as an analyst." He paused. "You're priceless." "I need that data," she insisted, nodding at the briefcase. "It has to go to the Bureau of Urban Integrity." A sound, almost a laugh, rumbled in Cassian's chest. "The BUI, that's where you take complaints about jaywalking and corrupt city inspectors. The people you just found, Miss Ellington owns the BUI. You hand them that laptop and your daughter, and that data will be lost in a tragic filing error before sunrise." "Then what's your plan?" she challenged me. "Murder like you threatened Gavin." "That was for your benefit. He'll live," Cassian said, turning his full attention to her. "I don't want violence. Violence is messy. It's loud. It's bad for my real business." He gestured to the sprawling, rain-slicked port below them. The Valamon outfit has run the quiet logistics of this port for 50 years. We move sensitive goods. We secure high-value assets. But the North Shore Consortium, the shadows behind Harbor North, they like messy. They want a war. They're trying to burn my territory to the ground to seize the ashes. You just found their blueprint. Mara processed this. She was standing between 2 monsters, one who wanted to burn the city and one who wanted to own it. "I want them stopped. legally. And I want them gone. Cashin replied, "We have a shared, if temporary, interest. I'm proposing a joint investigation." She stared at him. "You want me to audit the mob for the mob? What do I get out of this? Besides proximity to men who break glass doors with their fists." "Safety," he said, the word landing with absolute weight. "Guaranteed. For you and your daughter. And you get access. You found their digital footprint. I own the physical one. The real doc manifests, the union logs, the private ledgers of every container that moves through these waters." It was the ultimate temptation, the data she needed to build an unassailable case. "If I agree to consult," Mara said, choosing her word carefully, "I have terms, non-negotiable." Cassian inclined his head. "I'm listening." 1. No narcotics. If I find any evidence that your sensitive goods include drugs, the deal is off." "Agreed," Cassian said without hesitation. "Valemont doesn't poison its own people." 2. No one under 18, no minors are involved, threatened, or even looked sideways at. "That isn't a term. Miss Ellington, that is a fundamental law." 3, she said, taking a breath. "No civilians, no collateral damage. You don't threaten waitresses, shop owners, or anyone outside this fight. If you break these rules," she met his gaze, "I will use every skill I have to dismantle your empire right after I dismantle theirs." The silence stretched. Cassian studied her, the woman with the analytical mind and the iron spine. "You have my word." The investigation began not in a high-rise, but in the pressurized quiet of a safe-house apartment overlooking the harbor. Cassian laid out maps, not spreadsheets. "Here," he said, tapping a neighborhood of old brick tenements. "Little Calabres. It's where my dock workers live. Generations of them. The North Shore Consortium is trying to gut it." "Gentrification?" Mara asked. "Worse, eviction by environmental panic. They're pushing a massive city project called the Tidal Wall, a billion-dollar boondoggle to protect the coast." He slid a prospectus across the table. "The sole source contractor, Harbor North Logistics." Mara's fingers flew across the new, encrypted laptop Cassian had provided. She pulled up the blockchain data she had memorized from her office monitor. "The cold wallets," she whispered. "The crypto I tracked. It's being funneled into a shell corporation." A name appeared on her screen. "Tidal Forge. It's registered as an AI-driven marine data company. They have a city contract for sensor maintenance on the existing breakwaters." "Sensor maintenance," Cassian repeated, his eyes darkening. "The fees are astronomical," Mara said, her mind racing. "And the payment spikes. They correlate perfectly with Harbor North's own manifests for priority nightly loading. They're not maintaining sensors, Cassian. They're using the city contract to launder the money they're stealing, disguised as maintenance fees." "They're washing their own money with the city's money," Cassian finalized, "and using it to fund the project that will seize the land. The blockchain is complex, though it's tumbled. I can see the transactions, but the identities of the primary wallets are shielded by a protocol I haven't seen." Mara chewed her lip. "I need help. There's a guy, Noah Kincaid. We were in the same systems program. He went gray hat. Freelancer. He's the best at cracking chains I've ever seen. But he's paranoid." "Get him," Cassian said. It took Mara an hour and 2 encrypted message relays to get Noah on an audio-only call. His voice was sharp, wired on caffeine. "Mara, this is a hell of a time to resurface. Whatever line you're on, it's hot. It's clean. Noah, I need you to peel a blockchain. It's deep." "Deep means dangerous. Dangerous means my rate just quadrupled." "We'll pay it," Cassian's voice cut in. There was a long silence on the line. "Who the hell is we?" "The people who need the truth," Mara said. "Can you do it?" "Send the hash," Noah grumbled, and the line went dead. While they waited, Mara dug through a box of physical invoices Cassian's men had liberated from Harbor North's central accounting. They were mostly boilerplate, fuel, tariffs, overtime. But one, dated 3 months ago, made her blood run cold. It was an internal work order for a dedicated, high-speed fiber optic installation. "What is it?" Cassian asked. "It's a data line," Mara said, pulling up the Harbor North Tower blueprints. "A $2 million upgrade. But look at the destination." She pointed to the schematic. "The entire 17th floor is listed as vacant. It's empty concrete and ductwork." "Why run a pipeline to an empty room?" "Because it's not empty." Mara breathed, the pieces clicking into place. "It's a ghost server. They're not running their operation from the CFO's office. They're running it from room 17. That's where the real ledger is." She looked up at Cassian. "I have to get in there. If I can get physical access to that server, even for 30 seconds, I can get everything." Cassian looked at the blueprints, his mind mapping sightlines, access points, and guard rotations. He looked at Mara, at the fierce, analytical fire in her eyes. She was terrified, and she was determined. "You're not a soldier, Mara." "No," she agreed. "I'm a weapon, and you're going to point at me." He nodded. A slow, final decision. "You'll go, but you'll go my way." He moved to a heavy steel cabinet in the corner of the apartment. "Aegis Meridian will be guarding that floor. They're contractors, but they're good." He opened the cabinet, revealing rows of sleek, non-reflective black gear. "You'll get your server," Cassian said, his voice dropping. "But we go in like ghosts, and we come out like shadows." The infiltration of the Harbor North Tower began at 2 a.m. They moved not through the lobby, but through the pressurized silence of the maintenance corridors, a route Cassian knew like the veins on his own hand. They wore non-reflective black, and Mara carried only the air-gapped data drive and a cloned keycard, courtesy of Cassian's contacts. They reached the stairwell landing for the 17th floor. The hallway beyond was a canyon of glass and steel, silent and empty, watched by a single camera on a 30-second automated loop. Cassian put a hand out, his palm hovering an inch from her shoulder, stopping her. The air was dead still. "Quiet breathing is still too loud," he whispered. His voice was so low it was more a vibration in the air than a sound. "You need to breathe silently. In through the nose, hold for 2, out through the mouth, no fog, no sound." He demonstrated. It was unnerving, like watching a statue. Mara copied, forcing her panicked lungs to obey. The adrenaline was sharp and metallic on her tongue. The camera panned left. "Now," he breathed. They moved as one, crossing the 20 feet of exposed corridor to the blind spot by the service elevator. As they moved, a beam of moonlight from the atrium ceiling struck the glass, illuminating them for a split second. Instinctively, Cassian's hand landed on the small of her back. It wasn't a push, it was a shield, a solid, warm pressure that anchored her, guided her, and sent an electric jolt through her thin shirt. Her skin prickled. He was all business, but the touch was possessive, a physical claim in the face of exposure. The cloned card worked. The heavy door to room 17 clicked open. They slipped inside. Mara expected a humming server farm, a wall of blinking lights. The room was carpeted. It was a plush, silent, legal studio. Rows of immaculate, fireproof filing cabinets lined one wall. Expensive leather chairs were angled around a polished mahogany table. The only sign of technology was a single, black, high-capacity server rack in the far corner, humming quietly, emitting the sharp, sterile scent of ozone. "It's an archive," Mara whispered, moving toward the server. Cassian was already at the cabinets, his gloved fingers testing the high-security locks. "Not just an archive," he hissed. He pulled a slim tool from his pocket, and with a series of precise clicks, one of the drawers slid open. He pulled a file. "Non-disclosure agreements," he read. "Retention contracts." He froze. "Coastal Crime Task Force. Mara, these are patronage contracts. Harbor North isn't just bribing the CCT. They're paying them. This room is their legal armor." "I'm at the server," Mara said, her voice tight. She plugged in the air-gap drive. "Noah, I'm in. Give me the port access." She was talking to the tiny encrypted receiver in her ear. "You're live." Noah's disembodied voice crackled. "I'm slicing the firewall. You have 30 seconds." Mara's fingers flew, initiating the data clone. I see it. The core ledger, the real container logs, the ones from the parallel books. It's all here. Pulling, Noah said. Wait, there's a subledger. Encrypted. Got it. Oh, God. Mara, it's a debt bond. Signed by Mayor Arlen Pike himself. 10 seconds, Cassian said, his head snapping toward the door. Got it, Mara said, yanking the drive. The word was barely out of her mouth when a heavy thud echoed through the room. The maglocks on the door. A bright red light flashed on the keypad. They were trapped. We're made, Cassian said. His voice was flat, deadly. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hall. Shouts. Breach on 17, lock it down. An Aegis Meridian rapid response team. At least 4 of them. Mara's heart seized. She looked for an exit, a vent, anything. There was nothing. Cassian didn't run. He grabbed her arm, yanked her away from the server, and spun her into a shallow alcove between a filing cabinet and a frosted glass wall. In one motion, he pressed his body against hers, shielding her completely. He was a wall of muscle and heat. Her hands were trapped between their chests. Her face was turned against the wool of his coat, and she could smell the cold rain and ozone on him. His heart hammered against her own, a frantic, powerful rhythm. Don't move, he breathed, his voice a low vibration against her temple. The Aegis team was at the door, their voices muffled. They'll have thermals. They'll see us through the glass. What do we do? She whispered, her voice shaking. His lips brushed her ear. Trust me. Before she could process the word, he shifted his weight, reached up with one hand and smashed the butt of his sidearm into the fire sprinkler head directly above them. The world dissolved. A deluge of icy, pressurized water exploded downward. The shriek of the building's main fire alarm was deafening, a physical blow. The water blinds the infrared, Cassian yelled over the din. Grabbing her hand, the Aegis team was shouting in confusion outside. The locks disengage on the alarm go. He dragged her from the alcove and kicked open the stairwell door. It was pure chaos. Bells clanged, strobes flashed, and water poured down the concrete steps. They plunged into the darkness, taking the stairs 2 and 3 at a time. On the 15th floor landing, Mara's foot slipped on the wet concrete. She pitched forward, a cry stolen by the alarm. She never hit the ground. Cassian's arm snapped out, a band of steel locking around her waist. He didn't just catch her. He reversed her momentum, spinning her in the narrow space and pulling her flush against his chest, his grip iron-clad. They froze for a single, searing second. Her hands were flat against his soaked shirt. His arm was a vice around her. The alarms were screaming, but the only sound Mara could hear was the frantic, desperate drumbeat of their hearts, slamming against each other in the cold and the dark. They reached the sub-level parking garage. They were soaked, shivering but alive. The drive, Cassian panted, leaning against a concrete pillar. Mara pulled it from the waterproof pouch on her belt. It's here. She slotted it into the new laptop. The data was there, the ledgers, Pike's signature, and something else. What is it? An encrypted email draft, she murmured, her blood running cold. It was in a hidden partition. It mentions a fuse fund and a name. She looked up, her face pale. Rook. Rook? It was Noah's handle, she said, the words feeling like glass in her mouth. In college, it was his call sign. The question hung in the damp air. Who had just given her the key to find this Cassian, as a test, or was Noah the one who had trapped them? Cassian watched the doubt war with the fear on her face. He said nothing. Instead, he reached into his own soaked coat and pulled out a single, heavy, old-fashioned brass key. He pressed it into her cold hand, closing her fingers around it. This is for Pier 12, Warehouse 4, my grandfather's first office. Mara stared at the key. I don't understand. It's my fail-safe, Cassian said, his voice raw. Everything that matters is in there. My real ledgers, my history, theirs, if you lose me. If I don't make it out tonight, burn it down. Burn all of it. Burn me to the ground. It was a criminal's last will. It was the most profound act of trust he was capable of. "I have to draw them off," he said, pulling the collar of his coat up. The sound of boots echoed from the stairwell. "Aegis will be sealing this garage. You go north. I'm going south." Cassian. "Go." He gave her a push, not rough, but absolute. They separated. Mara ran, clutching the laptop and the key, her sneakers squeaking on the wet concrete. She looked back once. She saw his silhouette, broad-shouldered and defiant, moving deliberately toward the approaching flashlights. He disappeared into the dense, artificial fog of the fire suppression system. And in his absence, the cold, damp air of the garage felt impossibly, suddenly empty. Jules Marrow's newsroom was a soundproofed 10 by 10 storage closet above a 24-hour bakery that smelled of yeast and industrial-strength coffee. Jules, an investigative podcaster with a voice like gravel and eyes that had seen too much, didn't look impressed. "This is good," Jules said, tapping a manicured nail on Mara's laptop screen. The data from room 17 was splayed out in neat columns. Pike's signature on a debt bond, the CCT on a private retainer. That's juicy, but it's just data. Honey, it's digital paper. I need something that bleeds. "What does that mean?" Mara asked, the lack of sleep making her nerves fray. "It means I need a human face, a victim. The BUI can bury data. The Port Commission can table a report, but they can't ignore a riot." Jules leaned back, the ancient office chair groaning in protest. "Find me the fire, Mara, and I'll bring the gasoline." Mara found the fire 2 days later. She was in Little Calabrese, the neighborhood of brick row houses and small groceries that Cassian had pointed out. She was verifying the addresses of the dock workers whose pensions were tied to the phony Port Security Fund. A small, brightly painted kiosk sat on the corner of the pier, a local charity raising money for a worker's family. It happened fast, a black lifted pickup truck, the kind favored by Aegis Meridian contractors, mounted the curb at 40 miles an hour. It didn't slow down. It obliterated the kiosk, sending wood, cheap coffee, and donation jars flying. The truck fishtailed, and its passenger door opened just long enough for a hand to dump a ream of paper into the air. Flyers, they scattered in the sudden, shocked silence. "The tide is coming. Get out of the way." People poured from their houses. It wasn't fear that filled the street. It was a cold, unified rage. Jules would have her riot. The official channel slammed shut just as Cassian had predicted. Mara sent the data package, heavily encrypted, to a contact at the Bureau of Urban Integrity. The reply came back in less than an hour. "Following a preliminary review, this office finds we have insufficient jurisdiction to pursue this matter." Insufficient, a word that meant we're paid not to look. She checked the Port Commission. The topic of the tidal wall project, which should have been front and center, was suddenly moved to an addendum, pending further environmental review. Someone was locking every legal door. Frustrated, cold, and feeling the walls close in, Mara made a mistake. She went home, not to the safe house, but to her own small apartment, needing a change of clothes and a shred of normalcy. On the drive, she saw it, a sleek, dark gray sedan, nondescript but radiating power. It was parked 2 blocks from the abandoned St. Jude's Cathedral, the one struck by lightning 10 years prior. She saw Cassian Vale get out. He wasn't alone. Mayor Arlen Pike, his face pale and sweating despite the cold, was waiting for him under a dying oak tree. Mara parked, her heart sinking. She watched from a block away as they spoke. It was not a confrontation. It was a meeting. Pike gesticulated, his hands flying. Cassian was still a statue of patience. Finally, Pike reached into his coat and handed Cassian a thick manila envelope. It looked exactly like a payoff. Mara felt sick. She had trusted him, just a little. She had held his key, and here he was, cutting a deal with the very man she was trying to burn. She didn't wait to see the handshake. She drove away, the brass key in her pocket suddenly feeling like a betrayal. Inside the crumbling nave of St. Jude's, long after Pike had scurried away, Cassian did not open the envelope. He walked to a small, soot-stained alcove where locals still left offerings. He lit a single, tall votive candle. He placed it in front of a small, faded photograph tucked into a crack in the plaster. It was a boy of about 16, smiling, holding a fish. "Leo," Cassian said to the empty church. His voice was rough. A small, tarnished plaque was bolted to the stone below, in memory of Leonardo Vale, lost at sea, 2016. Below that, an addendum. Tragedy averted by the swift response of Harbor North Port Management. This wasn't business. This was a vendetta. Back in her apartment, Mara's encrypted phone buzzed. It was Noah. His voice was a panicked whisper. "Mara, you have to get out. You have to stop." "Noah, what's wrong? Did you find something?" "I can't. Just stop looking at the Rook Fund. It's not what you think. It's a poison pill. Mara, a fail-safe. You touched it." "What are you talking about?" "The wallets, the crypto, it's moving, all of it. It's liquidating. They're converting it all to stablecoin. They know, Mara, they know someone is inside." The line went dead. She scrambled to her laptop, her hands shaking. He was right. The cold wallets were bleeding out. A digital hemorrhage. Noah, the man who called himself Rook, had either just betrayed her or given her a final, desperate warning. She called Jules. "The money is moving, and Noah Kincaid is dirty. I'm running out of time." "Then I've got the name you need." Jules's voice was grim. "I pulled the incorporation papers for the Green East Coast Development Fund, the one funneling all the money to the Tidal Wall project." "Who is it?" "The biggest ghost in the city, a man who builds skyscrapers and endows museums. Gideon Vance Rusk." The name landed like a stone. Rusk, the billionaire philanthropist, the man who owned half of Port Jericho's legitimate skyline. He was the head of the snake. Mara stood by her window, looking down at the wet street, the pieces finally clicking into a horrifying, complete picture. Rusk was the money. North Shore was the muscle. Pike was the puppet, and Cassian was a wild card, playing his own game, and she was a pawn in it. She was utterly alone. A high-velocity whistle tore the air, followed by the sharp, deafening crack of impact. The window a foot to her left exploded inward, spraying the room with a million shards of glass. Mara screamed and dropped to the floor, her hands clamping over her head as a second shot punched a hole through her drywall. A sniper, a warning shot. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. Her ears rang, then a new sound, a soft scrape of rubber on metal, from her fire escape. She grabbed a heavy glass vase, the only weapon she had, and scrambled behind her sofa. The fire escape window slid open with a soft shush. A dark shape vaulted into the room, rolling low and fast, coming up to one knee. It was Cassian. "Get away from the wall," he commanded, his voice a low growl. "You," she hissed, half in terror, half in accusation. "You were meeting Pike. You set me up." "The meeting was a trade," he said, his eyes scanning the dark street below. He was furious. His internal data on Rusk from my silence on his signature. He's terrified, and he just proved it by sending that sniper. He moved to her, grabbing her arm. "You were emotional. You came home. It was stupid." He was already pulling her toward the open window. "You're my problem now, Mara, and I don't let my problems get shot." "Where are we going?" she panted, her stockinged feet slipping on the glass. "My ground, neutral territory, the Mariner's lantern." She balked on the fire escape, the cold wind whipping her hair. "Your hotel. I'm not your prisoner. Cassian, I'm not a package you get to protect." He stopped, turning to her on the narrow, rusty platform. The first sirens were beginning to wail in the distance. "I don't have time for this." "I'm not one of your men," she said, her voice shaking but fierce. "I go as your analyst, not your asset. I get my own key, I get my own code, or I take my chances on the street." He stared at her for a long, unblinking second. The air crackled between them. A slow, dangerous smile touched the corner of his mouth. "You get the key," he said. "Now move." The Mariner's Lantern was not a hotel. It was a fortress of quiet luxury, a place where the powerful came to disappear. The suite Cassian led her to was vast, all dark, reclaimed wood and cool gray upholstery, with a floor-to-ceiling wall of glass that looked out over the churning, black water of the bay. The fog was thick, a solid wall of white, and the low, mournful honk of a foghorn vibrated through the floorboards. Cassian shut the heavy door. The thud was final. He slid the chain lock, his movements economical. Mara stood in the center of the massive room, her arms wrapped around herself. The key to Pier 12 was a heavy weight in her jeans pocket. "You said I got my own key, my own code." He nodded, not looking at her. He was checking the windows, a predator securing his new lair. "The bedroom is through there." He pointed to a door. "It has its own lock. You take it. I'll take the sofa. The main door code is yours to set, 6 digits. No one else has it, not even me." He was holding up his end of the bargain. He was giving her the boundaries she'd demanded. The respect was, in its own way, more disorienting than the threat. Silence settled between them, thick and heavy, broken only by the foghorn. "Why the numbers?" he asked finally, his back still to her as he stared out at the white void. "What?" "In your apartment, you were ready to die for that laptop. Not for your life, for the data. Why?" Mara walked over to the sofa, but she didn't sit. "My father, he was a man of words," she said, her voice quiet. "He was a salesman. He could talk anyone into anything. He built our whole life on promises he never intended to keep." She took a breath, the memory still sharp. "When I was 9, he told us he was going to close the biggest deal of his life. He kissed my mother, smiled at me, and walked out. We never saw him again. He left. Nothing. Just debts. A mountain of them." She finally met his gaze in the reflection of the glass. People lie. Cassian, words are cheap. They shift. They betray. But numbers are the truth. A balance sheet doesn't have an agenda. It doesn't make promises. It just is. I trust the numbers because I can't trust people. He was quiet for a long time. He turned from the window, and the hard lines of his face seemed to soften under the dim light. "I'm the opposite," he said, his voice a low gravel. "I don't trust the numbers, because I know they can be changed." He moved to the armchair opposite her and sat. "My brother, Leo, was 16. He took a summer job on the docks, trying to be a man. Harbor North was running the crane logistics that year, a container. A freak cable snap. It fell." Mara's hand flew to her mouth, but she said nothing. "He was just a kid," Cassian said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "The accident report was clean, tidy. They said he was in a restricted zone, They said he wasn't wearing his safety gear. They blamed him. They buried my brother under a pile of falsified reports to avoid a lawsuit. The numbers said it was his fault." He looked up, and the profound exhaustion she had seen in the Harbor North office was back. A raw wound. "My father died 6 months later. That's when I learned, you don't ask for justice. You don't trust the reports. You take control. You own the port. You own the ledgers. You own the men. You build a wall so high that no one can ever touch your family again." The confession hung in the air, a shared space of old grief, 2 different betrayals, 2 different scars. "I'm hungry," Mara said suddenly, the mundane words breaking the spell. Cassian blinked, pulling himself back. "Room service is a risk. It puts you on a register." He stood and went to the suite's small, elegant kitchen. He opened the refrigerator. It was stocked. Fresh pasta, a lemon, eggs, a block of Parmesan. He stared at the ingredients as if they were a puzzle. "I don't really cook." "I can do it." "No." He pulled the pasta out, a flash of pride, or perhaps just stubbornness, in his eyes. "It's just pasta al limone. I can handle it." 10 minutes later, he placed a plate in front of her. The pasta was overcooked. The sauce had broken. It was a clumsy, terrible mess. A small, rusty sound bubbled up from Mara's chest. It took her a second to recognize it. She was laughing. A short, sharp, genuine laugh. It felt strange and wonderful. "It's awful," she said, taking a bite. "I know," he said. A tiny smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Eat." They ate in the strange, companionable silence. "Cassian," she said, putting her fork down, "I'm sorry about Leo, but it doesn't give you a blank check. It doesn't give you the right to become them." His smile vanished. "I'm not them. If you hurt innocent people, if you threaten families, if you do what Rusk is doing, I meant what I said. I will burn you down, too. I don't care about your reasons." He leaned forward, his gaze intense, pinning her. "There's a fantasy world, Mara, where everything is clean, where your numbers add up and the good guys win. I don't live there. I live in the mud. I get my hands dirty so that the people in Little Calabres don't have to, so that you don't have to. That's the line. I'm the man who stands on it. It's a dangerous line to walk. Then you'd better watch me," he said. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, and wrote down a series of numbers. He pushed it across the table. "What is this?" "The combination for the safe at Pier 12, the one you have the key for." Mara's breath caught. Why would you give me this?" "Because you're right," he said, his voice raw. "You're an auditor. You trust facts. The original Pier 12 contracts are in that safe. My entire history is in there. You want to hold me accountable? You're the only other person on the planet who can open it." He stood and walked to her, stopping just inches away. "It's the knife to my throat. Hold it steady." He reached out, his hand hovering, and then gently took her empty plate. As he did, his fingers brushed the back of her hand. It was a spark on dry tinder, a simple, accidental graze that sent a jolt straight up her arm. She looked up at him, and her world tilted. He was already looking at her, his eyes dark. The cold gray melted away, replaced by a heat that was unmistakable. His gaze dropped to her mouth. The air in the room became thick, charged. The foghorn sounded again, a low thrum against the glass, but she couldn't hear it. All she heard was the sudden, ragged sound of her own breathing. He was going to kiss her, and she was not going to stop him. He leaned in, his scent filling her senses that faint. Clean smell of salt, wool, and something uniquely him. She didn't move. She waited. He stopped, a fraction of an inch from her lips. She could feel the warmth radiating from him. He closed his eyes, just for a second, a silent battle. Then he took a step back, breaking the spell. "Rest," he said, his voice thick. "We have a war to fight in the morning." Mara nodded, her body humming. "Right, the war." She turned away, needing the cold glass of the window to steady her nerves. She pulled out her own encrypted phone, the one Cassian had given her. A message icon glowed, anonymous, scrambled. She opened it. It was a photograph, a grainy, long lens shot of Cassian standing under the dead oak tree outside the abandoned church. He was taking a thick manila envelope from Mayor Arlen Pike. Below the image, one line of text. "He sold you out." Mara's blood ran colder than the glass she was touching. She turned from the window, the encrypted phone feeling like a block of ice in her hand. She held it out. The picture of him and Pike glowed in the dark room. "You sold me out," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Hollow and dead. "You gave me the key, the combination. All to make me trust you while you cut your deal." Cassian didn't look angry. He looked tired. He watched her for a long, silent moment, then reached for his own phone. He didn't text. He tapped a file and placed it on the coffee table between them. "The envelope," he said, "was my price for his cooperation. I told him Rusk was coming for him next. I offered him a way out." He pressed play. A voice filled the room, thin and reedy, laced with panic. It was Mayor Pike. "I can't touch Gideon. You don't understand. The Fuse Fund isn't just a bribe, it's an insurance policy. He owns the whole city council. He's got the CCT?" Then Cashin's voice, low and cold. "Say his name, Arlen. Say who's pulling the strings." "It's Rusk." Pike's voice cracked. "It's always been Gideon Rusk." The recording ended. Mara stared at the phone. "You were baiting him. You were gaffing him like a fish." "I was giving him the shovel to dig his own grave," Cassian said, "and he just handed me the proof." As he spoke, the lights in the suite flickered. They buzzed, dimmed to a dull orange, and then died. The room plunged into absolute blackness. Outside, the low moan of the wind escalated into a high-pitched, violent shriek. The foghorn was drowned out by the roar of the nor'easter. A second later, the hotel's emergency generator kicked in, a heavy thud vibration from the basement, only to sputter, choke, and die. They were in total darkness, a mile high, with only the sound of the storm. "The city grid just went down," Cassian said. His voice was calm, a solid thing in the oppressive dark. Mara heard the scrape of a match. A small flame bloomed, illuminating his face in a dramatic, archaic shadow. He was lighting a thick pillar candle on the mantel. He lit another and another. The room filled with a soft, flickering, unsteady light. He found a battery-powered radio on a bookshelf and clicked it on. It hissed with static. "We're trapped," Mara whispered, stating the obvious. The wind hit the glass with a sound like a physical blow. "We're safe," he corrected, "but we are isolated." She watched him, his profile cut against the candlelight, the numbers, the data, the recordings. They all felt distant. The world had been reduced to this one room, the smell of wax and the screaming wind. "I've spent my entire life trusting data," she said, her voice barely above the storm, "because my father taught me that feelings were a lie, that trust was a word people used to get what they wanted. I built my whole world on things I could prove, things that were absolute." She looked at him, the man who was the walking antithesis of her entire life's philosophy, a man of violence, secrets, and instinct. "If that seawall breaks tomorrow," she whispered, the confession tearing out of her, "if this whole city floods, I want to, just once, make a choice based on feeling, not on data." The silence stretched. The candlelight danced in his dark eyes. He didn't move from his spot by the fireplace. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he walked toward her. He didn't rush. He moved with the deliberate, patient grace of a man who has all the time in the world. He stopped an inch from her. He didn't touch her. "And what?" he murmured, his voice a low vibration that she felt in her chest. "Is your feeling telling you now?" She looked up at him. She could see the faint, healed scar at his temple, the exhaustion in his eyes, and the profound, coiled strength. Her answer was not a word. She rose up on her toes and pressed her mouth to his. The first kiss was slow. It was hesitant, a question, not a demand. It was the taste of salt in the cold, clean scent of the storm. It was just lips on lips, a moment of profound, terrifying stillness. She pulled back, her heart hammering. His eyes were closed. This time, when she moved, it was with purpose. She fisted one hand in the front of his shirt, grabbing the material, and pulled him down to her. This kiss was not hesitant. It was a drowning. It was the release of every ounce of fear, tension, and loneliness she had carried for years. It was a choice. He responded instantly. His hands came up, not to her face, but to her waist. They gripped her, hard and firm, pulling her flesh against him. He wasn't gentle. He was anchoring her. He was holding her as if she were the only solid thing in the storm. He deepened the kiss, and she opened for him, a small gasp escaping her. His mouth was warm and demanding, and it was the most honest thing she had ever felt. He moved, backing her up until she hit the solid wall, trapping her there, his body a shield against the world. He broke the kiss, only to drag his lips along her jaw, his breathing ragged. "Mara," he whispered, his voice rough. It was the first time he had said her name like that. She tilted her head, giving him access, her fingers tangling in his hair. Her jacket, still damp from the rain, slid from one shoulder. The warmth of his skin through the thin cotton of his shirt was electric against her. He pulled back, just an inch. His forehead rested against hers. His eyes, dark and turbulent, searched hers in the flickering light. He was asking. He was checking. He was giving her the space to say no, even while his hands held her fast. She answered by winding her arms around his neck, pulling him back. "Stay," she whispered. It was all she needed to say. The rain lashed against the glass, a frantic, percussive curtain that shut out the rest of the world, leaving only the sound of their breathing and the soft, desperate whispers of their names in the candlelight. Later, they lay side by side on the thick rug in front of the fireplace, the candles burning low. They were dressed, but her jacket was gone, and his shirt was unbuttoned. The storm still raged, but its violence felt distant, the low, mournful call of a ship's horn, fighting the weather, echoed from the bay. "I've run this port for 10 years, Cassian said, his voice quiet, staring into the nearest flame. "I've faced down rivals, politicians and federal agents. I have never, not for 1 second, been afraid." He turned his head on the rug to look at her. "Not until tonight. I'm more afraid of losing you, Mara, than I am of losing this entire port." The vulnerability in his voice was a more profound intimacy than the kiss. "Cassian," she said, her own voice thick. "That first night, in the office, you said, 'She belongs to me.'" He nodded, understanding her real question. "I did." "Don't," she said, her voice fierce. "Don't call me yours. I am not property. I am not a prize you win or a territory you claim. I am not your auditor." He was quiet, tracing the pattern of the rug with one finger. Then he rolled onto his side to face her, propping himself up on one elbow. He looked directly into her eyes. "You're right," he said, his voice absolute. "You belong to yourself. Only you." He reached out, not to touch her face, but to gently grip her shoulder, a gesture of alliance. "I'm just standing on your side." The promise settled between them, a partnership, an equilibrium. It was broken by a crackle from the radio. The static cleared for a moment, and a tinny, urgent voice filled the room. Repeat. This is a bulletin from the Port Jericho Authority. Due to the high-risk nature of the nor'easter, the Coastal Crime Task Force has activated Operation Storm Grid. All units are moving to secure high-value assets along the coastline. All non-essential personnel are to stay clear of the Pier 12 industrial area. Mara sat bolt upright. Pier 12! Cassian was already on his feet, his eyes glacial. "The key," she breathed, scrambling up. "The safe. Operation Storm Grid is a lie. It's a cover. Rusk is moving. He's using the storm." "An informant," Cassian growled. "Noah. He's the only one who knows the value of the data. He must have told Rusk about the safe." Mara was already pulling on her jacket, her hands shaking, but not from the cold. "He's going to wipe it. He's going to take your history. He's going to take everything." She ran to the door, fumbling with the new code she had set. The storm was screaming. "You're not going alone," Cassian said. His hand closed over hers on the keypad, his grip solid and warm. He was in this. He was at her side. Pier 12 was a graveyard of steel, a silhouette of cranes against the screaming, bruised black sky. The nor'easter had made landfall. Rain moved horizontally, sharp as needles, and the wind shrieked through the metal containers like a living thing. They weren't the first to arrive. The heavy door of Warehouse 4 was already open, groaning on its hinges. Floodlights from 2 Aegis Meridian tactical trucks cut through the cavernous dark, illuminating the very thing they had come to protect, the old, heavy, walk-in bank vault that served as Cassian's ancestral safe. And standing in front of it, as if waiting for them, was Noah Kincaid. He wasn't the frantic, caffeine-wired voice from the phone. This was Rook. He was calm, dressed in expensive, waterproof tactical gear, his face shielded by a hood. He was flanked by 6 Aegis operators, all armed, all business. Cassian stepped in front of Mara, a solid wall. His voice was a low growl, barely audible over the wind. "You used her." "Hello, Mara," Noah said, ignoring Cassian completely. He powered on a heavy-duty tablet, its light illuminating his pale, intense face. "I knew you'd come. You can't resist a pattern." "You work for Rusk," Mara breathed, the betrayal of physical sickness in her stomach. "You trapped us in the tower." Rusk is a symptom," Noah scoffed, his voice sharp and superior. "He's just another variable in a corrupt equation. Gideon Rusk, Cassian Vale, North Shore, Valamont outfit, you're just 2 parasites fighting over the same host." He took a step toward her, holding up the tablet. "I told you, Mara, the numbers don't lie, but people do. You're trying to fix a broken system. I'm trying to end it. Join me." "Join you." "The Rook Fund wasn't for Rusk, it was for me," he said, his eyes bright with messianic fervor. "A war chest, you and me, Mara, the analysts. We have the data on both of them. We can expose the entire rotten structure. We can burn them all to the ground. No more bosses, no more dawns, just the truth." He was offering her the one thing he knew she craved: absolute justice. From the rain-swept darkness behind them, 2 of Cassian's men materialized, moving like shadows. They had followed. At the same instant, the Aegis operators tensed, raising their weapons. "Your choice, Mara," Noah said. "Him or the truth?" Mara looked at Cassian. He was watching her, his face grim, but he said nothing. He was letting her make the choice. She stepped forward, pulling the small, decoy USB drive from her pocket, the one Cassian had given her. "You're right, Noah. The data is all that matters." She held it out. "Here, the Room 17 data. It's yours." Noah smiled, a thin, triumphant sneer. He took a step to take it. It was the signal. The warehouse erupted, not in gunfire, but in violence. Cassian's men were on the Aegis operators. It was a brutal, silent ballet. The only sounds were the solid thud of bodies hitting metal, the sharp, electric snap of a stun baton, and the relentless, deafening whump, whump, whump of a loose tarpaulin on a container, flapping like a giant, broken wing in the storm. Noah scrambled back as Cassian moved on him, not with the rage of a brawler, but with the cold, precise anger of an executioner. "You're too late," Noah screamed, desperately raising his tablet. "You still think you're the hero? You think this is about Leo?" Cassian froze, his fist inches from Noah's face. "He lied to you," Noah shouted, jabbing a finger at the screen. "He told you Harbor North was responsible for your brother's death. He told you Rusk's company was at fault." He tapped the screen. A grainy black and white video file played. Security footage, a crane, a container, the deck of a ship, a young man. Leo walked below. "Look at the manifest," Noah shrieked. "Look at the foreman who signed off on the faulty cable. Look at the patch on his shoulder." On the screen, a man in a hard hat argued with the crane operator, then waved his hand impatiently. A close-up on his jacket, the Valamont crest. "It was your father's crew," Noah cried, his voice breaking. "Valamont was running a skeleton crew to save money. They skipped the safety check. Your own family killed him. Cassian Rusk just buried the report for them to keep his port running." Cassian staggered back, his defense, his armor, his entire world dissolving. He was no longer the son of Port Jericho. He was just the man who had failed his brother. An Aegis operator, recovering from the initial assault, saw the opening. He lunged at Cassian's unguarded back, a heavy baton raised. "Cassian!" Mara screamed. She didn't think so. She grabbed a heavy iron pry bar from a nearby crate and swung it with all her strength. It connected with the operator's knee with a sickening, wet crack. The man crumpled without a sound. One of Cassian's men was on the ground, blood pouring from a gash in his thigh. Mara grabbed Cassian's jacket, shaking him, dragging him back from the abyss of his own memory. "Now is not the time," she yelled. She shoved him toward his wounded man. "Press here. Press hard." Her eyes, which had been frozen in terror, were now burning with cold, analytical fire. She ripped her own belt from her jeans and, with practiced, efficient motions, fastened a tourniquet above the wound. She had chosen the safe, Noah yelled to his remaining men. "Forget them, blow the hinges." 2 Aegis operators raised their weapons, aiming at the vault's heavy steel lock. "Noah, don't," Mara shouted, pulling out her own phone. "You have 5 seconds." "It's over, Mara." "It's not a threat," she said, her thumb hovering over the screen. "It's a logic bomb. My dead man's switch. You attack that safe. I hit this button. The real data, the Room 17 files, the Fuse Fund, Pike's signature, and Rusk's offshore accounts goes live. To Jules Marrow, to the BUI, to the federal servers, to the world. Checkmate." Noah's face went white. He jabbed a finger in his ear, fumbling with his earpiece. Sir, we have a problem. She's wired. The data is on a trigger. She's bluffing." He listened, his face growing paler. Sir, she's not bluffing. The data is live." He was no longer talking to them. He was pleading with the third voice in his ear. Russ Gideon, call it off. The roar of the storm outside was suddenly cut by a dozen new sounds. Sirens. Red and blue lights strobed through the driving rain. Flooding the pier, the CCT, the corrupt task force arrives to secure the scene for Rusk. They piled out, weapons drawn, forming a perimeter. But behind them, a second set of vehicles skidded to a halt, a battered van with a massive satellite dish on its roof. The side door flew open. Jules Marrow landed on the wet asphalt, a microphone in one hand, a cameraman with a spotlight on his shoulder right behind her. "We're alive!" Jules shouted over the wind. They were all trapped. Mara, the whistleblower, Cassian, the wounded Dawn, Noah, the traitor, the corrupt CCT, and the live, streaming media. Every gun was pointed at every other gun, a perfect public stalemate. The air on Pier 12 was a pressurized hell of noise, the shrieking wind, the flapping tarpaulin, the sirens, and the shouts of the CCT commander. All teams form a perimeter, secure the vault. Mara looked desperately for the BUI, for the one clean unit she had contacted. They were absent. Instead, a new set of headlights cut through the rain, black unmarked SUVs, far heavier and more expensive than the CCT's cruisers. They rolled to a stop, and men in dark, federal-style suits emerged. They did not have CCT patches. Theirs read, Interregional Security Committee. A tall, thin man in an immaculate suit stepped out, holding a plastic-sheathed document. "By the authority of the ISC," he announced, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This is a compromised scene. We are taking jurisdiction." He pointed not at Noah, not at the Aegis operators, but directly at Cassian. "We have a warrant for the arrest of Cassian Vale." Jules Marrow was a rock in the center of the hurricane. Her cameraman's spotlight was a weapon, and she aimed it. "We live Port Jericho," Jules shouted, her voice raw. "The CCT has arrived, but so has a mystery agency. The Interregional Security Committee is attempting to arrest, not the corporate spies, but Cassian Vale." Her cameraman zoomed in on the ISC commander. The live stream feed, broadcast over a tenuous storm signal, was hitting the web. The viewer counted on her monitor, visible over her shoulder, and began to climb. 500, 3,000, it suddenly exploded past 10,000. Hashtags bloomed across the bottom of the feed hash title ForgeGate, #Save Jericho. "The CCT is moving on the vault," Mara shouted, seeing the corrupt officers bypass the standoff. "Jules, your feed. I'm sending it now." The Fuse Fund. Mara hit the trigger on her phone. On the live stream, the feed split. One half showed the chaotic pier, the other half showed a high-resolution PDF, the Fuse Fund ledger. "This is it," Jules narrated, her voice trembling with victory. "We are looking at the document. This is the proof. That is Mayor Arlen Pike's digital signature. That is CFO Gavin Rourke. And there is the recipient. The Green East Coast Development Fund. That name, Port Jericho, is a 100% owned shell corporation of Gideon Vance Rusk. The CCT commander ignored her. "Breach the vault, get the ledgers." Cassian was trapped. The ISC was moving on him from the left, the CCT from the right. His wounded man was bleeding, and his other men were outnumbered 10-1. He looked at Mara. He looked at the vault, his grandfather's legacy. Then he did the last thing anyone expected. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out the heavy 19th century brass key. He strode forward, past his men, directly into the white-hot spotlight of Jules Marrow's camera. He held the key high. "You want what's in the vault," he bellowed, his voice a roar that carried over the storm. "You want my history. You want the truth." The CCT commander stopped, confused. "Here's the key," Cassian yelled. He did not throw it to the ISC. He did not throw it to the CCT. He threw it in a high, glittering arc, straight at Jules Marrow. She fumbled, but caught it. A close-up of the heavy key filled the live stream. "Keep it safe, Jules," Cassian said, his eyes boring into the lens, speaking to the tens of thousands of people now watching. "Let history open it. Let the people decide." It was a masterstroke. The narrative shattered and reformed. He was no longer a mob boss cornered. He was a whistleblower, entrusting his legacy to the public. The CCT froze, their orders suddenly useless. How could they breach a vault when the key had just been given, live to the press? In the confusion, Noah Kincaid saw his entire operation evaporating. He was a ghost, a non-entity. He had lost. "No!" he shrieked, his voice thin and panicked. He lunged, not at Cassian, but at the cameraman. "Shut it off! Shut the feed off!" He grabbed the heavy camera, trying to wrestle it to the ground, in the struggle. The camera's bright light caught him at a new angle. His rain hood was ripped back. As he fought the cameraman, his jacket, which had been zipped tight, gapped open at the neck. He was wearing a tactical earpiece, and on the small black wire clip, rendered in perfect high definition by the lens he was trying to break, was the blue and silver compass logo of the North Shore Consortium. "Get that!" Jules screamed, pointing. "Zoom in. He's not an analyst. He's North Shore. He's their man. He's been working for Rusk the entire time." The standoff had reached its peak, guns, data, and cameras. Then, a new sound, faint but growing, not a siren. It was the deep, bronze dong of the bells from St. Jude's, the abandoned church in Little Calabrese. It was the old signal, the call to arms. From the darkness, a mass of people emerged, moving onto the pier, not cops, not soldiers. It was the people of Little Calabrese, dock workers, grandmothers, shop owners. They were carrying patio umbrellas, old plywood sheets, and trash can lids. They didn't charge, they walked, a grim, determined wall of bodies, and formed a protective circle around Jules, her cameraman, and the van. They raised their makeshift shields. The CCT commander looked at the wall of civilians. He looked at his men. "Move them, push them back." Cassian's men tensed, ready to engage the CCT, but Cassian put his hand on his lead man's chest, stopping him. The civilians were in the way. "Boss, we can clear them," his man hissed. "No," Cassian said. He stepped back. He looked at Mara, and in the chaos, his voice was low, clear, and absolute. "This is the line. Mara, the one I told you about, we don't cross it, ever." The stalemate was total. The CCT couldn't fire on unarmed civilians on a live feed. Cassian refused to fight through them. The ISC was powerless. In the eye of the storm, Mara's encrypted phone vibrated. She stared at the screen. Unknown number? She answered it. It was a whisper, so terrified it was barely audible. It was Mayor Arlen Pike. "Miss Ellington." "He knows? Rusk, he knows the data is public. He knows it's over. He's purging." "What?" Mara yelled over the wind. "The Green Canal, the old textile mill, his private archive. He's destroying the physical evidence. Everything, ledgers, contracts, everything." The mayor was sobbing. "The storm has knocked out the city's bridges. The ISC has the routes locked down. You have 1 hour, maybe less. They're setting fires. You're the only one who can stop him. Only you." The line went dead. They didn't wait for the stalemate to break. In the chaos of the civilian shield, Mara grabbed Cassian's good arm. "Pike's call. Rusk is at the Green Canal. He's purging the archives." They were ghosts, slipping out from behind the wall of bodies and melting into the storm. Cassian's SUV was 3 blocks away, a black shadow in the driving rain. Mara pushed him into the passenger seat and took the wheel. She was the analyst. She was the driver. Cassian slumped, his left arm bleeding from a shrapnel wound he'd taken in the warehouse. He was already using his belt to cinch the bicep. "The kit under your seat," he grunted. Mara jammed the SUV into gear, her hands sure on the wheel, and floored it. The city was a watercolor of flashing lights and overflowing gutters. She found the emergency kit with one hand, tossing it onto his lap as she swerved to avoid a downed power line. The storm was no longer a threat. It was a physical enemy. The wind hammered the heavy vehicle, and the water was no longer just rain. It was a rising, churning flood. "The canal is on the flats," Cassian said, his voice tight with pain as he wrapped the bandage. "It'll be the first thing underwater." "He's counting on it," Mara said, her eyes locked on the road. He looked at her profile, illuminated by the red and blue chaos of the city behind them. "Mara," he said, the word heavy, "that first night, when I said you belonged to me, I saw you as a piece on the board, strategic leverage. I was wrong." Mara's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the road as a surge of brown water washed over the hood. "I was never leveraged. Cassian," or she said, her voice low and steady, "I'm the one holding the scales." The Green Canal textile mill was a dark, corrugated steel box, already sitting in 2 feet of water. 2 Aegis tactical trucks were parked on the loading dock, their engines running, exhaust plumbing in the rain. They left the SUV and waded through the knee-high water. The side door was unlocked. The inside was a deafening inferno. The noise wasn't the storm, it was the high-pitched scream of 2 industrial-sized document shredders and the deep, throaty roar of a data incinerator, its chimney glowing red-hot. 4 Aegis mercenaries, working with frantic speed, were feeding ledgers, hard drives, and boxes of files into the machines. In the center of the vast room, another merc was kneeling by a steel support beam. He was setting a digital timer on a block of C4. "They're rigging the whole place," Cassian yelled over the din. "It's not a purge, it's a demolition." "The server room," Mara shouted, pointing to a reinforced steel door marked with a high-voltage sign. "The cold storage, the physical backups have to be in there." 5 of them, Cassian breathed, chambering around. "They're Aegis, they move on instinct. Buy me 10 seconds. Before she could object, he grabbed a road flare from his coat pocket, cracked it, and threw it high and deep into the far corner of the warehouse. It exploded in a hissing, blinding red light. "Contact left!" one of the mercs shouted, his tactical training kicking in. All 4 of them turned, raising their rifles toward the flare. "Go!" Cassian yelled, shoving Mara toward the server room. She hit the door and plunged into the cold, quiet tomb. Rows of black server racks hummed. She found the drive array, her fingers finding the release clips. She began pulling the heavy, cold storage drives, stuffing them into her waterproof bag. Outside, she heard the pop-pop-pop of Cassian's suppressed pistol, a grunt, a man shouting. She grabbed the last drive and ran for the door. It wouldn't budge. The frame was jammed. She threw her shoulder against the steel. Nothing. "Cassian." The main room was on fire. The incinerator had overloaded, spitting a plume of flame that had caught a stack of pallets. One of the mercs was down. Cassian was crouched behind a steel beam, trading fire. He saw her. He saw the jammed door. He ran, not to cover, but to her. He ran through the open, straight into the line of fire. He hit the door with his full, 200-pound weight. It groaned but held. "Back," he roared. He fired 2 rounds directly into the locking mechanism. The steel screamed and buckled. He kicked it open, grabbed her arm, and hauled her out. A split second later, the server rack she had been standing in front of exploded in a shower of sparks. The heat was a physical blow, searing their faces. They ran, choking on the smoke, moving down the central corridor as one. They rounded a stack of crates and skidded to a stop. Gideon Vance Rusk stood by the main exit, perfectly dry. He wore an immaculate black raincoat, and his silver hair was combed. He was flanked by 2 fresh Aegis guards. He looked at the fire, the water, and the chaos with mild distaste. "Miss Ellington," he said, his voice a calm, polite baritone. "What a remarkable waste of effort, all for a few numbers." He looked at her, his eyes cold and assessing. "I've reviewed your file. Your student debt is 6 figures. Your mother's mortgage is underwater. I am prepared to offer you, let's call it 8 figures, a clean wire transfer, enough to erase your entire life and your children's lives from debt. Just hand me the drives." Mara's breath was ragged. She was soaked, covered in soot, but her eyes were clear. She held his gaze. She was also holding her encrypted phone. "You think you can buy me?" she asked, her voice loud and clear. Rusk's eyes narrowed. "I am buying you. It is a simple transaction." "That's a very generous offer. Mr. Rusk," Mara said, her thumb tapping the screen. The phone chimed. Audio file captured. Uploading to Logic Bomb 2.0. Rusk's face changed. "What are you doing?" "I'm recording your bribe," she said. The screen flashed again. "Upload complete. Published to 7 media and federal sources, and I'm publishing it." Rusk's mask of calm vanished. "Kill them!" he snarled. The 2 guards raised their rifles. Cassian moved first, shoving Mara behind a stack of steel drums. He didn't aim to kill. He was a professional. He fired 2 shots, suppressing fire, aiming for the concrete above their heads, making them duck. Ping, ping. "The charges!" Mara yelled. "He's got the whole place wired." She saw a fire alarm and a manual sprinkler valve on the wall. While Cassian kept the guards pinned, she smashed the alarm and wrenched the heavy red valve. The sprinklers roared to life, dousing the room in icy water. Then she saw another lever. Inert gas system. She pulled it. A loud hiss filled the air as the fire suppression gas began to flood the room. "It won't be enough," Rusk roared. The water was making the timers on the C4 block spark and fizz. He moved, faster than a man his age should. He lunged through the firefight, grabbed Mara by her hair, and yanked her back, spinning her around to use as a human shield. A cold, heavy pistol barrel pressed hard against her temple. "Drop it, Vale," Rusk shouted, his composure completely gone. Cassian froze, his gun raised. "I said drop it," Rusk shrieked, pressing the gun so hard it hurt. On the nearest support beam, the digital timer on the C4 block was clearly visible, its red numbers stark in the chaos. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. The timer on the bomb read 2 minutes. The air was thick with smoke, inert gas, and the smell of ozone. Rusk's arm was a vice around Mara's throat, the gun barrel cold and hard against her temple. Cassian stood in the rising water, his hands empty. He was bleeding. He was unarmed, and the man who had stolen his brother's life was holding his... "Let her go, Rusk," Cassian said, his voice quiet. He took 1 step forward. "Stay back, Vale," Rusk shrieked. "You think I won't do it? She's just another number on a balance sheet." "You're right," Cassian said. He slowly, deliberately, slid his pistol from its holster and tossed it into the churning water at his feet. It vanished with a splash. "You win. Let her go. Take me instead." Rusk laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "Take you, the great Cassian Vale. You're worthless. Your entire family line is worthless." "You should know," Cassian said, his voice dangerously soft. He was baiting the hook. "You're the one who ended it. You're the one who killed my brother." "Leo," Rusk sneered. That stupid kid. He was just collateral damage, a loose end. He saw the Valemont foreman signing off on the faulty cable. Your own father's mess. I just tidied it up. I buried the report, and I buried the kid. Mara's eyes were locked on Rusk. He didn't know. He couldn't. The button on her coat was not a button. It was the lens of a high-definition micro camera. And the audio feed, patched through her phone, was broadcasting live. Across the city, Jules Marrow, still surrounded by the citizens of Little Calabrese on Pier 12, held her microphone up to a speaker. "We are patching in a live feed from an undisclosed location," she shouted. And Rusk's voice, tinny and laced with static, echoed across the pier. Just collateral damage, a loose end. I buried the report and I buried the kid." A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Tens of thousands of people watching the live stream heard the confession. Gideon Rusk, the philanthropist, the city builder, was a murderer. In the warehouse, the timer hit 1 minute. "It's over, Gideon," Cashin said. "You're finished." "I'll finish you," Rusk screamed, his eyes wild. He raised the gun, moving it from Mara's temple to aim at Cassian's chest. It was the opening. Mara did not wait. She drove her head back, smashing the back of her skull into Rusk's nose. A wet, cartilage-snapping crack echoed in the room. Rusk roared in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. At the exact same instant, Cassian moved. He did not charge. He dove low. Mara dropped, twisting, her fingers grabbing the pistol Rusk had just dropped from his bleeding face. The world exploded. One of the smaller, secondary charges, one of the ones dampened by the sprinklers, went off. It was not a demolition. It was a concussive blast. The explosion threw Rusk backward into a steel support beam. Mara and Cassian were on the floor, the icy water washing over them, as sirens, new sirens, different from the CCT, converged on the building. The doors burst open. This time, it was not the ISC. It was not the CCT. These men wore tactical gear with bold, simple letters, BUI Special Integrity, the real BUI, the uncorrupted federal-level branch, finally forced into action by the undeniable public proof. "Gideon Vance Rusk," their commander yelled, "you are under arrest by temporary federal warrant." Rusk was on his knees, his face a mask of blood, staring in disbelief as they cuffed him. The fallout was immediate. Within the hour, a shaking. Tearful Mayor Arlen Pike held a live press conference from his office, announcing his immediate resignation by dawn. Harbor North Logistics had its city contracts frozen and its operating license suspended. The Interregional Security Committee was officially dissolved, its funding sources now the subject of a massive federal investigation. The city, for the first time in a generation, could breathe. 3 months later, the wind was cold and clean, smelling of salt and new paint. In the heart of Little Calabrese, a new glass door opened. The sign above it read, "The Civic Ledger Lab." Inside, Mara stood in front of a classroom of 30 citizens dockworkers, teachers, shop owners. She was teaching them how to read a municipal budget, how to follow a blockchain, how to use the numbers as a weapon. "The truth belongs to you," she said, her voice strong. "You just have to know where to look." In the back of the room, Cashin Vale stood, his hands in his pockets. He was an observer. He had provided the seed money for the lab, a massive, fully transparent and anonymous donation. He held no shares. He had no control. The Valemont outfit had changed. It had shrunk. The shadows were still there, but they had pulled back to the water's edge. Cassian now ran legitimate port security, high-end logistics, and, unofficially, a network that protected the port's civilians. His promise to the community was simple and absolute. That evening, they stood on the repaired roof of Warehouse 4 on Pier 12. The city glittered across the water. The new scar on Cashin's arm was pale in the moonlight. The wind whipped Mara's hair across her face. "It's not over," she said. "It's never over," and he agreed, "but it's a start." She turned to him, the faint scent of steel and rain still clinging to him. She stepped into his space, her hands landing on his chest. She could feel his heart, steady and strong beneath her palms. "I don't belong to anyone," she whispered, her voice fierce. "But tonight, I'm choosing you." Cashin's hands came up to cup her face, his touch gentle, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. "And I," he murmured, "am choosing the right side of this city." She rose on her toes. This kiss was not the desperate, frantic clash of the storm. It was slow. It was deep. It was a promise. Her lips led, and he followed. A quiet surrender. Their hands found each other, fingers lacing together, an oath of equals, taken against the cold, salt air. In the distance, the bells of St. Jude's rang, not in alarm, but in celebration. Down in Little Calabrese, the families had strung lights along the pier, a new constellation on the water. Jules Marrow's final live stream broadcast ended, not with a face, but with text, overlaid on a shot of the new, lit-up pier. "When the truth belongs to the public, the harbor belongs to us all." Mara leaned her head against Cassian's shoulder, feeling the solid, steady rhythm of his breathing. The wind was cold, but she was warm. She reached into her pocket and her fingers closed around a familiar shape. Her old metal pen. She smiled. This time, she would use it to sign the new charter for the port, not to erase the truth, but to write it. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to connect with you. Please comment below and let us know where in the world you are listening from, and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Mafia Boss Story and like this video. You can also support us by hitting the hype button, so this story can be heard by even more people.